Welcome back to this week's episode of Reverence for Reverie. And it feels so fitting that this conversation is landing right around Samhain, the ancient Celtic festival that marks the end of the harvest, the moment when the veil between the worlds is said to grow thin. And, we here in the US also call this by other names. Halloween is one of them, right? But it's a time when the boundaries between the seen and the unseen really soften. And when we become more attuned to what we can feel, but not quite name, the whispers, the presence, the energy that moves beneath the surface of things. And really, that's what I want to speak to today, because when I talk about the field, as you've heard me mention in other podcasts, episodes, I'm not referring to something that's abstract or mystical, even though it can actually feel that way. The field is the felt space between us. It's the invisible atmosphere that shapes how we think and feel and relate. It's what you sense when you walk into a room and immediately know, without even a word needing to be spoken, whether it's safe, tense, inspired, or heavy. And that knowing is not intuition alone. It is your sensitivity to the field, which we actually all have access to, but not everyone cultivates that sensitivity. So every relationship, every family, every business, every community has a field, an emotional tone, a collective resonance, and a kind of psychic weather system that all of us contribute to and all of us feel. You could say that the field is the unseen world of human connection. And like the thinning veil of this particular season, it's always right here. It's always waiting for our awareness. And each of us carries a personal field too, through our nervous system, through our consciousness, through the frequency we emit simply by being. And for those of us that are called into more in this lifetime, into leading others, into a role that has some level of influence in the lives of others in your life, especially a sort of psycho-spiritual kind of leadership. The work is not just to manage people and projects, but it is to hold this field that I'm talking about with integrity. And that is the hidden labor of this kind of leadership, not just the outer work of doing, but the inner work of being able to stay coherent in a world that is addicted to chaos. Because your field is your leadership. It's not what you say, but it's what others feel in your presence. So let's dive in. So you've heard me talk about coherence. Coherence is this ability to stay connected to yourself, right? For your nervous system and your thoughts, emotions, actions, your way of being to be in alignment, right? So, but coherence is also not perfection. It's not this fixed state or some sort of permanent calm. Again, it's the ability to stay connected to yourself, to keep the sort of threads of your being woven together, even as life moves and breaks and rearranges around you. And fragmentation happens when those threads start to fray, when we're pulled in 1,000 different directions by expectations or fears or urgency or the need to prove or perform. It's what happens when our energy sort of splinters off and when we start moving from reaction instead of responsiveness. And you can really feel it when it's happening. That sense of being scattered and brittle or easily tipped into overfunctioning or collapse. The nervous system really starts searching for anchors outside of itself. So that will look like searching for the next task, the next hit of validation, the next thing that you can control. That is fragmentation. It's the psychic equivalent of static in the field. And when a leader begins to fragment, everyone around them will feel it. Now, coherence, on the other hand, is inner alignment. It is the nervous system's quiet signal that says, I can stay present to what's here without losing myself in it. So it's not that the chaos externally disappears, but that you stop identifying with it. You can hold the charge, but you metabolize it and translate it. And you can feel coherence in someone's presence, just like you can feel fragmentation. It is that sort of grounded steadiness that doesn't demand attention, but just naturally commands it, right? It's magnetic, not because it's loud, but because you feel the trustworthiness of it. There's sort of, if you've ever come into the presence of someone like this, it feels like your shoulders can kind of drop. Like you might even feel yourself take a deep breath, right? From an analytic lens, coherence is the integration of the self. This is the ego's capacity to hold contradiction without collapsing. It's when conscious and unconscious are able to be in dialogue with each other rather than in conflict. It's also evidenced in the ability to sort of become your own container so that your world isn't spilling out all over the place in projections and blame and things like that. And it's really rare, because coherence requires a deep level of awareness, and it requires self-regulation. And, if you've been listening for the last couple of episodes, when I say self-regulation, I'm not meaning contraction or so-called control or something like that. It's the courage to sit with and be with what's uncomfortable and metabolize it and move it through rather than discharging it out onto others. And it is much easier to outsource coherence, or what we think is coherence, seeking stability through control and compliance or distraction, than it is to actually build that coherence within us. But coherence is not just psychological. It is energetic. It is quantum. In physics, coherence describes what happens when particles begin to vibrate in harmony, when they begin to align into a shared rhythm that allows information to move freely between them. So the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. When coherence breaks down, though, energy disperses. This is entropy. The signal becomes noisy, staticky. Communication between the particles, or as we're talking about here, people, it starts to become distorted. Our nervous system operates very much in the same way. So when we're coherent and when our inner world is resonant and integrated, our energy flows cleanly. We transmit clarity and calm and safety through our field, which is just our way of being, and it's felt outside of us, right? But when we're fragmented, that internal signal sort of is scrambled. People can feel that too. They may not know why, but they will sense a dissonance, right? That there is an incongruence between what we end up saying and what we're actually holding beneath the surface. That is why coherence and resonance matter so much in development, but in particular in leadership, as I'm talking about here, because we're not just communicating through words. We are communicating through our frequency. And when your nervous system is coherent, it naturally entrains the systems around it. You've probably felt this, the sense of exhaling in the presence of someone that's steady. Like I just said, that deep, big breath. Or conversely, tensing up around someone who's feeling overwhelmed, even if they're saying all the right things to you. I've had that many times. It's a part of the work that a therapist does is, the client that maybe comes in and says, everything has been great this week, but I can sense that's not the full story. There's something below the surface, right? That is resonance, and that is the field at work. So holding the field with integrity is not about staying calm all the time, but about being congruent with yourself. Congruence means staying true to the tone that you want to set, even when the atmosphere gets heavy. Because coherence isn't about control, but about conductivity, right? It's what allows energy and emotion and truth to be moving through us without distortion. So that's okay. Like, to have a bad day means you can have a bad day. If you feel that, it doesn't mean you act out on it, but you can say, hey, this isn't a great day for me. I'm going to need some time. I'm going to need some space here, right? It's okay to be honest in that. And that is actually coherence. It does not mean that if you're having the shittiest day of your life, that then when someone says, how's everything going today? You go, oh, it's wonderful. This is such a great day. I know we've experienced people doing that, right? It's such a norm in our culture. And yet we feel that under the surface, even and often in unconscious ways. That is what makes coherent leadership feel very different, because it's not a performative calm, but it is an embodied sort of clarity. And it's certainly not the avoidance of chaos, but more like the ability to hold that chaos without losing the coherence all of the time. I'll share a story here. I once worked with a man who was brilliant, truly a visionary, and also completely exhausted. And he was always striving, always pushing for the next breakthrough, the next expansion, the next achievement. And, for a long time, that really worked for him. On the surface, he did look successful, but underneath, he really was fraying. Every ounce of his energy went into trying to make things happen, to control outcomes and timelines and people. And he could not see that at the time, but the field that he was creating was just saturated with striving energy. People could feel it, even if it was never said out loud. That feeling when you're in someone's presence and you sense that subtle undertone of urgency, like it's sort of a hum underneath the surface of like, I need this to work, right? That is not something that you can hide with polished words or perfectly executed plans. Like, the field will always tell the truth. It becomes off-putting, right? So over time, unsurprisingly, his business plateaued. His relationships became strained. His body began to show the cost of it. There was insomnia, fatigue, there was chronic tension, bouts of anger. He really kept trying to fix it with more and more strategies, more and more systems, more and more force. But force is simply more fragmentation and motion. That kind of energy is moving certainly without coherence. And yet, when we began to work together, he started to realize that it was not about adding more, but actually about slowing down. And in fact, removing some things, tending to this field that I'm talking about. And that meant tending to his nervous system first and foremost, learning what regulation actually looked like and felt like, not just intellectually understanding it. It also meant intentionally creating space for rest, for clarity to come through, for connection, rather than filling every quiet moment with productivity. I heard this story not long ago where, a guru of some sort invited his student in, and the student came sort of spilling forth with all of the things that were going on in his life and just kept going and going and going and going. And very quietly, the guru gets up and grabs a cup and tea, sets it down on the table in front of this student, and begins to pour the tea. And he just keeps pouring it and pouring it and pouring it until eventually the teacup is overflowing. And the student says, "Whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's overflowing. Stop." And the guru quietly says, like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. There is so much information that is filling this space. How can I show you anything else unless you first empty your cup, right? It's to say that when you are filling your life with so much noise, there isn't room for anything else to enter, any clarity to enter. It also meant for him getting honest about the fear that he was feeling, that if he stopped pushing, that everything was going to fall apart around him. And over time, slowly, something began to shift. He stopped trying to control all of the outcomes and began to regulate his own field, his own experience, meaning, tending to this inner coherence. And things began to move differently and honestly move more fluidly on their own. Opportunities started arriving for him, uninvited. Collaborations that had once felt stalled began to flow again. More clients began to show up with ease. And it's not because he was doing more. That's the thing. He actually was just becoming more coherent. That clearer signal that people could come in to. And that is the paradox. Coherence actually attracts more than control ever can. Because when you are coherent, you become a stabilizing force in the field. You don't have to chase. And what's meant for you finds resonance with you. I want you to think about it like this. Everything that's meant for you is already circling. It's orbiting. It's sensing where it can land. But if your field is chaotic, if your energy is splintered, if you are here, there, and everywhere, there is absolutely no clear channel of entry. It's like trying to dock a ship in turbulent waters, right? The harbor will keep shifting. These waves will keep breaking. Nothing can actually safely arrive. The same thing happens energetically. When our system is dysregulated and when we're trying to control and perform and to prove, the field becomes so noisy. That signal that I'm talking about just gets scrambled. And opportunities and relationships and insights that are meant to meet us can't find coherence with us. The moment we begin to stabilize further, when we can breathe, regulate our nervous system, come back into our bodies, come back into ourselves, the field begins to clarify. It's like the wind stills, the waters calm, and there is then a clearer place to land. That is what coherence does. It turns static into clarity and makes us more receptive again. And it's why this isn't just spiritual language. It is physics. It's embodiment. When our inner world is ordered, the outer world can recognize us. So instead of chasing and striving and forcing, our task becomes one of tending to coherence and to clarity, tending to the field. Because whenever this sort of signal or clarity is clear within you, life can find you. That's also when the ego relaxes enough to stop defending everything all of the time and to start relating to the parts of ourselves even. With this person I'm talking about, he stopped attacking all of these parts of himself that he felt were weak or uncertain. And as those parts began to reintegrate, he gained back the psychic capacity that was so kept up in fighting them off, right? I don't think people realize that when we are trying to exile parts of ourselves all of the time, a great deal of psychic energy and power is split off into those areas. When we can let that calm and come back into integration, we regain the power that was lost with the fight of keeping those at bay, right? So then the power that I'm talking about, it becomes quieter, steadier, more sustainable. It doesn't feel like it needs to move through force. And the field reorganizes around this level of coherence. So that is what happens when we stop trying to dominate our reality and we start participating in its natural rhythm. When we can really lead from alignment rather than urgency all of the time, we then create the space for synchronicity and to notice the kind of effortless flow that control can never, ever manufacture in our lives. And this is why frequency integrity matters in every domain of life. Because our coherence doesn't just stop at the self. It radiates outward through every interaction, every system, every exchange of energy. And when I speak about frequency integrity, I'm talking about energetic honesty. It's the alignment between what you project and what you embody, between the signal that you are sending outward and the truth of your inner state. When our frequency has integrity, there is no split between image and the essence. Now, I say no split. Again, there's always complexity here. The reality is we aren't ever going to be some like perfectly integrated human. But it's getting that closer and closer into clarity, right? Our presence then, our message, our choices, they all carry the same tone. You can feel it. Again, immediately when someone is in frequency integrity, their energy is clean. You don't experience that there's some hidden agenda. There's not a subtle undertone of like manipulation or grasping or aggression. They don't have to convince you of who they are. You'll sense it. And when that integrity is lost, there is a mismatch. The words might sound inspiring, but you're left with like your nervous system not believing them. Again, that's static in this sort of signal. You can hear the music, but it's distorted, right? You could say that frequency integrity is the energetic version of integration, the conscious and unconscious working together, not against each other. And when the ego and the deeper self become more aligned, the psyche emits a clearer signal. That is frequency integrity. And in a quantum sense, that signal is not metaphorical, it is literal. There is an electromagnetic field of the heart and brain, and it extends beyond the body. That's how we have MRIs and EKGs. And when those systems are coherent, they create a resonance that others around can begin to entrain with, like tuning forks, right? This is why one grounded person can shift the energy of an entire room. Their frequency becomes stabilizing. It is congruent. It is trustworthy. So frequency integrity is both an ethical, from my perspective, and an energetic practice. It is the discipline of ensuring that the vibration you're transmitting matches the values that you say you live by. It's saying, I won't use my energy to manipulate outcomes. I won't perform alignment when I don't actually feel it. I won't build a field that looks beautiful on the outside, but is brittle and constricting and controlling. That's not about perfection. It's about awareness, because our field is always reflecting us back to ourselves. Frequency integrity is the courage to listen to what it is showing us. In business, it actually determines whether people feel safe in your orbit or subtly on guard. We can sense when someone's presence is really clear and grounded versus when their ambition is carrying this undertone of scarcity or desperation. Clients and collaborators and teams, they may not have the language for it, but their nervous system can certainly feel it. It's the difference between an offer that feels like an invitation and one that feels like pressure. And in relationships, it's what allows connection to deepen rather than fracture under stress. When both people can stay coherent, they can hold their own emotional field without collapsing or projecting everything. Conflict actually becomes a type of alchemy. It becomes the actual site of evolution rather than just perpetual reenactments that get us in the same place, which is nowhere but stuck. That's how intimacy expands. It's not through agreement or no conflict, but actually through coherence in the midst of conflict. And that extends, of course, into family systems, the most ancient and complex fields of all. Coherence is what actually allows healing to ripple across generations. When one person in their lineage begins to self-regulate, to stay present in moments where previous generations shut down or lashed out, they change the existing field. They become the new pattern, and the nervous system of that family begins to reorganize around their steadiness. So coherence is certainly not just personal. It is a relational act. It's collective. It is how we rethread the larger fabric of everything that we're part of. And holding a coherent field does not mean that you'll never wobble. It means that you return to center more quickly whenever you do. And it means knowing how to locate yourself again when life inevitably pulls you off course. That is the hidden labor of leadership, the invisible work no one applauds, but everyone certainly feels. And it's the energetic housekeeping that makes our outer growth more sustainable. It's what allows a movement or a business or a family to expand without burning out its foundation. And when we hold the field with integrity, we become transmitters of a stability in a time when we're surrounded by fragmentation. We'll model what it means not to lead from force, but from our frequency, and certainly not from domination any longer. That has gone on long enough, but instead leading from depth. And that, I think, is the real art to leadership. Not how much you're holding in your hands, but how cleanly you can hold your field. So, as we close this week, I would invite you to pause and just notice where in your life is coherence giving way to chaos? Where are you trying to hold others when what really needs or what is really needed is to return to your own center? You just take a breath in this moment and just feel your feet on the ground and remember that coherence is contagious. Your calm isn't passive, it's leadership, but not performed to calm, right? And your integrity is not invisible. It is the architecture of this field that you hold. So as we move through Samhain, a time when the veil between seen and unseen grows thin, it is worth remembering that what's invisible doesn't mean it's insignificant. The field that you tend, the energy, the attention, the care that no one sees that goes into this is what makes everything else possible. That's the work of leadership, the hidden labor, and I would say the quiet magic, if you want to call it that. Because in the end, leadership is not about how much you're doing. It is about how much reality can organize through you when you are coherent enough to hold it. It is about frequency integrity, being so aligned that the unseen knows where to find you. So as this season turns, let this maybe be your offering. Return to your center. Tend your field. Trust that what is meant for you is always going to find resonance when your signal is clear. And if this conversation spoke to you, I would love for us to stay connected. You can join my email list, Riffs, Reverie, and Reflections, for more transmissions that are between episodes, quiet insights, invitations into deeper spaces of the work. And if you're craving community, a place to be held in both your integration and your expansion and to be witnessed without performance, I'm building something just for that. It's not quite ready yet, but you can join the community waitlist to be the first to know when it is ready. All of those links will be in the show notes. And of course, if this episode resonated, please do share it with a friend or leave a review wherever you listen, because your reflections help this work find the people who need it most. And that means the world to me. So until next time, stay steady, stay coherent in your own right. And as always, let the reverie lead you.